The emergency alarm shrieked through the corridors of Nexus Station, its red lights casting an ominous glow across the sterile white walls. Nurse Sarah Chen rushed through the medical bay, her worn sneakers squeaking against the polished floor as she prepared for another wave of casualties from the ongoing war between the Galactic Federation and the Zephyrian Empire. Sarah had been stationed on this remote outpost for 3 years now, treating wounded soldiers from dozens of different species. The war had been raging for over a decade, and the neutral medical stations scattered throughout the galaxy served as the only safe havens where enemies could receive treatment without fear of capture or execution. The massive doors to the landing bay hissed open, and Sarah could see the emergency medical transport descending through the atmospheric shield. Steam rose from its hull as the ship touched down with a heavy thud that shook the entire platform. Within moments, the cargo bay doors slid open, and the triage team rushed forward with their anti-gravity stretchers. Dr. Kelmar, the station's chief medical officer, emerged from the ship with his blue-scaled hands covered in alien blood. The Andromedan physician's normally calm demeanor showed visible strain as he approached the medical team, waiting at the entrance. 17 casualties, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of exhaustion. 14 Federation soldiers and 3 Zephyrian prisoners of war. The Federation forces are in critical condition, but stable. The Zephyrians! He paused, his large black eyes reflecting the overhead lights. The Zephyrians are dying. Sarah watched as the medical team began unloading the stretchers. The Federation soldiers, mostly humanoid species with various skin tones and features, were quickly wheeled into the primary treatment areas. Their uniforms bore the distinctive blue and silver insignia of the Galactic Federation, and their wounds, while serious, had been properly treated during transport. Then came the Zephyrian prisoners. Sarah had never seen a Zephyrian up close before. They were tall, nearly 7 feet in height, with lean, muscular builds covered in skin that shifted between deep purple and silver depending on the light. Their faces were angular, almost predatory, with large golden eyes and sharp features that spoke of a warrior culture. Most striking were the crystalline structures that grew from their foreheads and along their arms, which pulsed with a faint inner light. The 3 Zephyrian soldiers were in terrible condition. Their breathing was labored, their crystal formations dim and cracked, and their silver-purple skin had taken on a sickly gray pallor. Unlike the Federation soldiers, these prisoners had received only basic field treatment during transport. Dr. Kelmar gestured toward the Zephyrians with obvious reluctance. They'll need to wait. Federation casualties take priority, as per our current agreements with both governments. The Zephyrians will receive treatment once we've stabilized our primary patients. Sarah felt her stomach clench as she looked at the 3 dying aliens. One of them, who appeared to be the youngest, was barely conscious. His golden eyes found hers across the medical bay, and she saw something in that gaze that transcended species barriers. Pain, fear, and perhaps most heartbreaking of all, a quiet acceptance of death. Doctor, Sarah said carefully, how long will it take to treat the Federation soldiers? At least 6 hours for the most critical cases, Dr. Kelmar replied without looking up from his medical tablet. Maybe 8. The Zephyrians will have to wait. Sarah glanced back at the 3 prisoners. 8 hours. They wouldn't last 8 hours. She had enough medical training to recognize the signs of severe internal bleeding, organ failure, and shock. Without immediate intervention, they would be dead within 2 hours. What if we set up a secondary treatment area? She suggested. I could begin basic stabilization while the primary team handles the Federation cases. Dr. Kelmar's scaled head snapped up, and his expression hardened. Absolutely not, Nurse Chen. You are not qualified to handle major trauma surgery, especially on an alien species we know little about. And need I remind you that these are enemy combatants? The Federation has made it very clear that their soldiers receive priority treatment. But they're dying, Sarah protested. So are many Federation soldiers throughout this sector, the doctor replied coldly. Our resources are limited and our obligations are clear. The Zephyrians will receive treatment when it becomes available. Until then, they wait. Sarah watched as the medical team efficiently moved the Federation soldiers into the treatment rooms. State-of-the-art medical equipment hummed to life. Robotic surgical assistants prepared for complex operations, and the best medical minds on the station focused their attention on saving their allies. Meanwhile, The three Zephyrian prisoners were wheeled into a holding area that served as little more than a glorified waiting room. The space was clean but basic, equipped with only monitoring equipment and basic life support. No surgical facilities, no advanced treatment options, just machines that would track their vital signs as they slowly died. Sarah completed her assigned duties in the main medical bay, checking on Federation patients, updating charts, and assisting with minor procedures. But her mind kept wandering to the holding area where the Zephyrians lay waiting. Every few minutes she found excuses to walk past the room, glancing through the transparent aluminum window at the three figures on their beds. The youngest one was getting worse. His breathing had become shallow and irregular, and the crystal formations on his arms had almost completely lost their glow. Sarah had seen enough death to know that he had perhaps an hour left, maybe less. During her break, she accessed the station's medical database and began researching Zephyrian physiology. The information was limited since formal contact between humans and Zephyrians was relatively recent, and most of what existed came from battlefield autopsies and interrogation records. Still, she learned that their crystal formations were connected to their circulatory system, that their blood chemistry was silicon-based rather than iron-based like humans, and that their major organs were arranged differently than most humanoid species. More importantly, she discovered that many of the basic principles of trauma medicine still applied. Stop bleeding, maintain circulation, stabilize vital organs. The techniques might need to be modified for their unique physiology, but the fundamental approach remained the same. Sarah made her decision. That evening, as the medical bay settled into its night cycle, and most of the staff focused on the complex surgeries in the main treatment rooms, Sarah gathered basic medical supplies and made her way to the holding area. She used her access card to enter the room, telling herself she was just checking on the prisoner's conditions. The youngest Zephyrian's eyes opened as she approached his bed. Up close, she could see that his golden irises contained flecks of green and silver, like precious stones. His breathing was so shallow she could barely see his chest moving. "I'm going to help you," she whispered, knowing he probably couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would convey her intentions. For the first time in her career, Nurse Sarah Chen was about to violate direct orders, risk her position, and potentially face court-martial, all to save the life of an enemy soldier that everyone else had given up for dead. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she activated the portable medical scanner. The device hummed softly as it passed over the young Zephyrian's body, creating a three-dimensional image of his internal structure on the small display. What she saw confirmed her worst fears: massive internal bleeding in the equivalent of his liver, a punctured lung analog, and severe damage to what appeared to be his primary circulatory organ. The scanner's translation protocols struggled with the alien physiology, displaying warnings in multiple languages about unknown biological signatures and incompatible medical parameters. But Sarah had always been good at improvisation. During her training on Earth, she had worked in emergency rooms in war zones, treating injuries with whatever supplies were available. She had learned to see past the surface differences and focus on the fundamental problems that needed solving. The first priority was the bleeding. Sarah carefully cut away the makeshift bandages that had been applied during transport. The wounds were unlike anything she had seen before. Instead of the red blood she was accustomed to, a silvery fluid seeped from the injuries, seeming to pulse with its own inner light. When the liquid hit the air, it began to crystallize at the edges. She grabbed a bio-sealant gun from her medical kit and began applying the emergency patches. The sealant was designed to work on multiple species, and to her relief it seemed to adhere to Zephyrian tissue. The bleeding slowed, though it didn't stop completely. The young alien's eyes remained fixed on her as she worked. Despite his critical condition, there was an intelligence in his gaze that reminded Sarah why she had chosen to become a nurse in the first place. Every being deserved a chance to live, regardless of politics or species. She moved to the second prisoner, an older Zephyrian who appeared to be some kind of officer, based on the additional crystalline formations around his neck and shoulders. His injuries were different but equally severe. Multiple fractures along his arms where his natural crystal formations had been shattered, creating internal lacerations that were slowly killing him. As Sarah worked to stabilize him, she began to notice something remarkable about Zephyrian physiology. Their crystal formations weren't just decorative or cultural modifications. They were integral parts of their biology, functioning as both structural support and as conduits for their circulatory system. When the crystals were damaged, it was like having multiple bones broken and arteries severed simultaneously. She used a micro-welder from the engineering supplies to carefully fuse some of the smaller crystal fragments back together. It was delicate work, requiring her to essentially perform surgery on living gemstones while avoiding damage to the surrounding tissue. The technique was completely improvised, based on her understanding of both medical procedures and material science. The third prisoner was the most challenging. He was conscious and clearly in agony, but he kept trying to communicate with her. His voice was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, musical and haunting. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. He was trying to warn her about something. As she examined his injuries, she realized what he was concerned about. One of his larger crystal formations had been completely shattered, and the fragments were still embedded in his torso. But removing them incorrectly could cause massive internal bleeding that would kill him within minutes. Sarah needed more advanced equipment than what she had brought with her. She needed surgical tools, better scanners, and ideally, someone with actual surgical training. But requesting help would mean admitting what she was doing, and that would end her unauthorized treatment immediately. Instead, she made another decision that went against every regulation in the book. She accessed the medical bay's inventory system and began borrowing equipment during shift changes when the storage areas were unmonitored. A precision surgical laser here, an advanced bioscanner there, pain medication that she carefully documented as damaged in transport. Over the course of 6 hours, while the rest of the medical staff worked on the Federation soldiers, Sarah performed 3 separate life-saving procedures on enemy prisoners, using stolen equipment in an unauthorized treatment area. It should have been impossible for one nurse to accomplish such complex work alone. But Sarah had advantages that went beyond her medical training. Her human adaptability allowed her to work with unfamiliar alien physiology, in ways that more specialized species might struggle with. Her emotional investment in her patients gave her the motivation to push beyond normal limits. And perhaps most importantly, her human stubbornness refused to accept that some lives were worth less than others. The breakthrough came when she was working on the young prisoner's damaged circulatory organ. She noticed that the Zephyrian's natural healing processes were trying to activate, but seemed to be blocked by some kind of interference. Using a biofrequency scanner, she discovered that the alien's crystal formations were no longer resonating at their proper frequency due to the damage. On a hunch based on her understanding of crystal properties from her geology classes decades ago, Sarah tried exposing the crystals to specific electromagnetic frequencies. To her amazement, the formations began to glow brighter and resonate properly again. Almost immediately, the young Zephyrian's vital signs improved dramatically. She quickly applied the same technique to the other 2 prisoners. While it didn't heal their injuries completely, it activated their natural healing factors and stabilized their conditions enough that they would survive until proper medical treatment became available. By morning, when Dr. Kelmar made his rounds to check on the prisoners, he found 3 Zephyrians in stable condition instead of 3 corpses. The young one was even conscious and alert, his golden eyes tracking the doctor's movements as he examined the readings on the monitoring equipment. "This is impossible," Dr. Kelmar muttered, studying the medical charts. Their conditions were terminal when they arrived. They should be dead. Sarah stood quietly in the corner of the room, having arrived early for her shift to check on her patients. She watched as the doctor tried to make sense of the medical readings, noting the improvised treatments and the equipment that had mysteriously appeared overnight. "Nurse Chen," Dr. Kelmar said slowly, his large black eyes focusing on her with sudden intensity. "Do you know anything about this miraculous recovery?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. She had made her choice, and she was prepared to face the consequences. But before she could respond, something unexpected happened. The young Zephyrian prisoner spoke, his voice weak but clear and accented galactic standard. "The healer," he said, looking directly at Sarah. "She gave us back our song." Dr. Kelmar's expression shifted from suspicion to complete bewilderment. Zephyrians were known for their poetic way of speaking, often using metaphors that other species found difficult to interpret. But there was something in the prisoner's tone that suggested he meant exactly what he said. "What song?" the doctor asked. The young alien raised one of his hands, and Sarah could see that the crystal formations along his arm were now glowing with steady, rhythmic pulses. The song of our crystals, the song of our life. Your machines are silent to us, but she found our frequency. Sarah realized with growing amazement that she had not only saved their lives, but had discovered something about Zephyrian biology that the galaxy's medical establishment had missed entirely. Their crystal formations weren't just biological structures. They were resonant organs that maintained the frequency patterns necessary for life itself. And somehow, through intuition, determination, and sheer human stubbornness, a simple nurse from Earth had figured out what teams of alien scientists had not. The consequences of Sarah's actions came swiftly and harshly. Within hours of Dr. Kelmar's discovery, Station Commander Vextar had called an emergency disciplinary hearing. Sarah found herself standing in the commander's office, facing a tribunal of senior medical staff and military officers from 3 different species. Commander Vextar was a Rigelian, one of the founding species of the Galactic Federation. His insectoid features were arranged in what Sarah had learned to recognize as extreme displeasure. His compound eyes reflected the harsh overhead lights as he reviewed the charges against her. "Nurse Chen?" His voice buzzed with mechanical precision. "You stand accused of multiple violations of station protocol. Unauthorized treatment of enemy prisoners, theft of medical equipment, violation of direct orders from a superior officer, and endangering station security by providing aid to hostile combatants. How do you answer these charges?" Sarah kept her back straight and her voice steady. "I answer that I saved 3 lives that would have been lost to bureaucracy and prejudice." The room erupted in angry buzzing and chittering from the assembled officers. Dr. Kelmar, who had been forced to testify against her, looked uncomfortable as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Your personal opinions about protocol are irrelevant," Commander Vextar continued. "You violated direct orders and potentially compromised our relationship with the Galactic Federation. These prisoners could have been valuable intelligence assets. By saving their lives, you may have enabled them to return to combat and kill Federation soldiers. Or," Sarah replied, "I may have saved 3 people who could provide information about Zephyrian medical needs that could help us treat future casualties more effectively. My discovery about their crystal resonance patterns could revolutionize how we approach their physiology." Chief Medical Officer Kelmar spoke up reluctantly. "While Nurse Chen's unauthorized actions were completely inappropriate, I must acknowledge that her discovery about Zephyrian biocrystal resonance has indeed provided valuable medical insights. Our subsequent tests have confirmed that this frequency modulation technique dramatically improves healing rates in Zephyrian patients. That's irrelevant to the disciplinary matter at hand," snapped Colonel Thorne, the human military liaison officer. Sarah was disappointed but not surprised that her own species representative was the most vocal critic of her actions. "Military discipline exists for a reason. If we allow medical staff to pick and choose which orders to follow based on their personal feelings, the entire command structure breaks down." Sarah watched as the tribunal discussed her fate. She could be court-martialed, discharged from service, even imprisoned depending on how seriously they wanted to pursue the charges. But as she listened to the debate, she realized that something else was happening in the background. Word of her actions had spread throughout the station. Medical staff from other departments had begun requesting transfers to work with her. Several alien species had sent official communications expressing interest in her frequency-based healing techniques. Most surprisingly, 3 more Zephyrian prisoners had been brought in over the past day, and they had specifically requested treatment from the human healer. Dr. Kelmar had been forced to admit that these new patients responded remarkably well to Sarah's modified treatment protocols. The combination of traditional medical intervention and biocrystal frequency modulation had reduced healing times by over 60% compared to standard approaches. As the hearing continued, Sarah became aware of unusual activity in the corridors outside the commander's office. There were more people moving around than normal, and she could hear voices speaking in multiple alien languages. The answers came when the office doors suddenly opened without authorization. 3 figures entered the room, flanked by station security officers who looked uncomfortable but didn't interfere. The first was Captain Marcus Webb, a human from the Federation Navy Medical Corps. The second was Dr. Storiesrt, a renowned Andromedan physician who had written several definitive texts on xenobiology. The third figure made everyone in the room freeze in shock. It was a Zephyrian, but not one of the prisoners. This individual wore the distinctive robes of a diplomatic envoy, and the crystal formations along his arms and forehead pulsed with complex patterns that Sarah somehow knew indicated high rank and authority. "I am Ambassador Kithara of the Zephyrian Empire," the figure announced, his musical voice filling the room. "I have come to speak with the human healer who gave song back to our warriors." Commander Vexitar's compound eyes widened in what Sarah recognized as panic. Unauthorized diplomatic contact with enemy representatives during wartime was a massive security breach that could have repercussions far beyond his station. "Ambassador, this is highly irregular," the commander buzzed. "We have no protocols for—" "Your protocols nearly killed 3 of our people," Ambassador Kithara interrupted, his crystal formations flashing with what appeared to be controlled anger. "Only the intervention of this human preserved their lives. We demand to understand how one of your medical staff succeeded where your chief physicians failed." Captain Webb stepped forward, his Federation uniform crisp and authoritative. "Commander, I've been authorized by Federation Medical Command to investigate Nurse Chen's procedures. Her techniques have shown remarkable promise for treating casualties from both sides of this conflict." Dr. Zirith added her voice to the discussion. "The medical implications of frequency-based cellular regeneration could revolutionize battlefield medicine. If these techniques can be refined and standardized, we could save thousands of lives." Sarah found herself at the center of a diplomatic and medical controversy that was rapidly spinning beyond anyone's control. The simple decision to help 3 dying patients had somehow evolved into a potential breakthrough that could change the course of the war itself. Ambassador Kithara approached Sarah directly, ignoring the protests from the assembled officers. Up close, she could see that his crystal formations were far more complex than those of the soldiers she had treated. The patterns seemed to shift and change like living artwork. "You restored the life song to our warriors," he said, his golden eyes studying her intently. "This is a gift that exists in Zephyrian healing traditions, but has been lost to us for generations. How did a human learn to hear the crystal frequencies?" Sarah realized that she was being asked a question that could have profound implications for interspecies relations. Her answer could influence not just her own fate, but potentially the course of the ongoing war. "I listened," she said simply. "I looked past the surface differences and tried to understand what their bodies were trying to tell me. The crystals weren't just structures, they were communication systems. When they were damaged, it was like their bodies lost the ability to coordinate healing responses. The ambassador's crystal formations began pulsing in what Sarah somehow knew was amazement. You speak of the deep resonance, the fundamental frequency that connects all Zephyrian life. Our own healers study for decades to develop such understanding." "Maybe that's the problem," Sarah replied, her confidence growing as she realized the scope of what she had stumbled upon. "Sometimes an outside perspective can see things that expertise misses. I didn't approach this as a Zephyrian medical problem. I approached it as a universal healing challenge." Commander Vexitar tried to regain control of the situation. "This is all very interesting, but we still have the matter of Nurse Chen's disciplinary violations to address." Ambassador Kithara's crystal formations flashed brilliant gold, and his voice took on a tone that suggested he was not accustomed to being ignored. "You would punish the human for saving lives? For discovering healing techniques that could benefit both our peoples?" The room fell silent as everyone realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. A diplomatic representative of an enemy empire was arguing for the defense of a human medical officer who had violated military protocol to save enemy soldiers. Sarah understood that her unauthorized treatment had accidentally opened a door that no one had expected. The question now was whether the various powers involved would choose to walk through it or slam it shut. The diplomatic situation escalated rapidly beyond anything the neutral medical station was equipped to handle. Within 12 hours of Ambassador Kithara's arrival, Nexus Station found itself hosting the most unusual gathering in its history. Representatives from both the Galactic Federation and the Zephyrian Empire had arrived, ostensibly to observe Sarah's medical techniques. However, Sarah quickly realized that something much larger was happening. Her unauthorized treatment of 3 dying prisoners had inadvertently created the first formal diplomatic contact between the warring powers in over 5 years. Sarah was assigned temporary quarters under what was diplomatically termed protective observation while the Various factions tried to determine what to do with her. She found herself in the strange position of being simultaneously under arrest and being courted by multiple governments who wanted to understand her techniques. The breakthrough came when she was allowed to demonstrate her frequency-based healing methods under controlled conditions. A new group of wounded soldiers had arrived, including casualties from both sides of the conflict. Sarah worked under the watchful eyes of medical experts from 4 different species, carefully documenting each step of her process. The results were undeniable. Federation soldiers who received the frequency treatments healed 30% faster than those treated with conventional methods. But the effect on Zephyrian patients was even more dramatic, with healing rates improving by up to 70% when their biocrystals were properly resonated. Dr. Kelmar found himself in the uncomfortable position of having to admit that a human nurse with improvised techniques was achieving better results than the station's state-of-the-art medical facilities. The implications are staggering, he reported to the assembled observers. Nurse Chen has essentially discovered that we've been treating Zephyrian physiology incorrectly for the entire duration of this conflict. Their biocrystals aren't just decorative or structural elements, they're active components of their healing systems. Ambassador Kithara spoke up from his position among the observers. What she has rediscovered is an ancient practice that our people lost during the Great Persecution 3 centuries ago. Our traditional healers were systematically eliminated by a plague, and with them died the knowledge of the deep resonance healing methods. Sarah looked up from the patient she was treating, a young Zephyrian soldier whose leg crystals had been shattered by artillery fire. You mean this technique was known to your people before? Known, practiced, and revered, the ambassador confirmed. But the knowledge was passed down through oral tradition and direct training. When the healers died, the techniques died with them. We have been incomplete as a people ever since. Captain Webb leaned forward with obvious interest. Are you saying that the Zephyrian Empire would be willing to share this traditional medical knowledge with Federation researchers? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone in the room understood that they were discussing something far beyond medical procedures. They were talking about the potential exchange of cultural knowledge between enemy civilizations. The knowledge belongs to those who can use it to preserve life. Ambassador Kithara replied carefully. If this human can teach our techniques to others who would use them for healing rather than warfare, then perhaps some good can come from this long conflict. Over the following days, Sarah found herself at the center of an unprecedented collaboration. Federation medical researchers worked alongside Zephyrian healing specialists, with Sarah serving as a bridge between their different approaches. Her human adaptability and intuitive understanding of biocrystal resonance allowed her to translate between the scientific methodology of the Federation and the more intuitive practices of Zephyrian traditional medicine. The work was challenging and occasionally frustrating. The 2 sides had been fighting for so long that even basic communication required careful diplomatic navigation. But the results spoke for themselves. Wounded soldiers from both sides were receiving better treatment than they had ever experienced before. Sarah also discovered that her techniques had applications beyond battlefield medicine. The frequency-based approaches could help treat chronic conditions, accelerate recovery from surgery, and even address some genetic disorders that had previously been considered incurable. But perhaps the most significant development was the gradual change in attitude among the medical staff. Doctors and nurses who had viewed enemy prisoners as expendable annoyances began to see them as patients worthy of the same care they would provide to their own allies. The transformation was most visible in Dr. Kelmar, who had initially opposed Sarah's unauthorized treatments. As he worked more closely with Zephyrian healing specialists, he began to appreciate the sophistication of their traditional methods. I've spent my entire career believing that technological advancement was the key to better medicine, he confided to Sarah during a break between treatments. But these ancient techniques achieve results that our most advanced equipment cannot match. It's humbling to realize how much we still don't understand, Sarah nodded, watching as a Federation nurse carefully adjusted biocrystal frequencies on a Zephyrian patient under the guidance of a traditional healer. Maybe that's the point. We get so focused on our own approaches that we forget other species might have different solutions to the same problems. The Real test of the new collaborative approach came when a massive casualty situation overwhelmed the station's resources. A battle near a populated asteroid colony had resulted in over 200 wounded soldiers from both sides being evacuated to Nexus Station simultaneously. Under normal circumstances, Federation casualties would have received priority treatment while Zephyrian prisoners waited. But Sarah proposed a different approach. Mixed treatment teams consisting of Federation medical personnel and Zephyrian healers working together on patients from both sides. The proposal was radical and politically dangerous. If anything went wrong, both governments would likely blame the experimental collaboration and return to their previous adversarial positions. Commander Vextar was reluctant to authorize such a massive deviation from standard protocol. But the sheer number of casualties left him with few alternatives. Either they tried the collaborative approach or people from both sides would die waiting for treatment. If this experiment fails, he warned Sarah, the consequences will extend far beyond this station. You could set back medical cooperation between our species by decades. And if it succeeds? Sarah asked. The commander's compound eyes reflected uncertainty. If it succeeds, you may have changed the nature of this war itself. Sarah looked around the medical bay, which had been transformed into a unique hybrid of Federation technology and Zephyrian healing traditions. Doctors and healers from enemy civilizations worked side by side, sharing knowledge and techniques that had been kept separate by politics and prejudice. Then I guess we'd better make sure it succeeds, she said. The next 18 hours would determine whether Sarah's simple act of compassion toward 3 dying prisoners could evolve into something that might help end one of the galaxy's longest and most devastating conflicts. The massive casualty operation began at dawn, ship time. Sarah stood in the center of the transformed medical bay, watching as teams of doctors, nurses, and healers from both sides prepared for the most ambitious medical collaboration in galactic history. The first wave of patients arrived within the hour. Federation soldiers with plasma burns, Zephyrian warriors with shattered crystal formations, and civilians from the devastated asteroid colony who had been caught in the crossfire. Under normal circumstances, the different species would have been separated into different treatment areas with different priorities. Instead, Sarah watched as mixed teams assessed patients based purely on medical need rather than political affiliation. A Zephyrian healer worked alongside Dr. Kelmar to stabilize a Federation captain with severe chest trauma. Meanwhile, Federation nurses assisted traditional healers in treating Zephyrian soldiers whose biocrystals had been damaged by energy weapons. The initial results were remarkable. Patients who would normally have waited hours for treatment based on their species and military status were receiving immediate care from the most appropriate specialists available. Healing times were dramatically reduced, and the mortality rate dropped to levels none of them had seen before. But the real breakthrough came when Sarah was treating a young Zephyrian civilian who had been critically injured in the asteroid attack. The child's biocrystals had been completely shattered, and traditional healing methods were proving insufficient to save her life. Working with healer Vintar, one of the Zephyrian specialists, Sarah attempted to use advanced Federation surgical techniques combined with biocrystal resonance therapy. The procedure was entirely experimental, requiring them to essentially rebuild the child's damaged crystal matrix using synthetic materials while maintaining the proper frequency patterns. As they worked, other medical personnel gathered to observe. The procedure required perfect coordination between Federation technology and Zephyrian healing traditions. Sarah found herself translating between 2 completely different medical philosophies while performing life-saving surgery on a patient whose survival could influence the future of interspecies medicine. The synthetic crystals are not resonating properly, healer Vintar reported, his musical voice tight with concentration. They lack the living frequency that natural biocrystals possess. Sarah studied the readings on her biofrequency scanner, an idea forming in her mind. What if we don't try to replace the natural crystals? What if we create a hybrid system that amplifies the damaged frequencies? She began modifying the synthetic crystal structures, using micro-welding techniques to create resonance chambers that could amplify the weak signals from the child's remaining natural crystals. It was a completely new approach that combined engineering principles with medical intervention. The breakthrough moment came when the hybrid crystal system activated. The child's vital signs immediately stabilized, and her natural healing processes began to accelerate beyond anything they had seen before. The synthetic crystals weren't replacing her damaged biostructures. They were enhancing them, creating a more powerful healing matrix than either natural or artificial systems could achieve alone. Word of the successful hybrid procedure spread throughout the medical bay within minutes. Other teams began experimenting with similar approaches, combining the best of both medical traditions to achieve results that neither could accomplish independently. Dr. Kelmar found himself working closely with Ambassador Kithara to develop new protocols that could be standardized and taught to medical personnel throughout the galaxy. "This changes everything," he told Sarah during a brief break. "We're not just treating casualties anymore. We're developing entirely new approaches to medicine that could benefit every species in the galaxy." But the most significant moment came when Sarah was called to treat a special patient. Commander Zaktor, one of the highest-ranking Zephyrian officers ever captured by Federation forces, had been brought in with injuries that were rapidly proving fatal. The political implications were enormous. Commander Zaktor was responsible for several major Federation defeats and was considered one of their most dangerous enemies. His death would be celebrated by many Federation officials, and his recovery could potentially save thousands of Zephyrian lives in future battles. Sarah found herself facing the same choice she had made with the first 3 prisoners, but on a much larger scale. Everyone in the medical bay was watching to see what she would do when treating the enemy commander who had killed so many of their allies. She approached Commander Zaktor's bed without hesitation. His injuries were extensive, and his biocrystals had been damaged so severely that his body was shutting down system by system. But as she began her assessment, she realized that his case was actually an opportunity to demonstrate the full potential of the new collaborative techniques. "I'm going to need everyone's help with this," she announced to the medical bay. Federation specialists for the surgical repairs, Zephyrian healers for the biocrystal restoration, and full access to both synthetic enhancement systems and traditional frequency modulation techniques. What followed was the most complex medical procedure ever attempted on Nexus Station. Teams from both sides worked together for over 8 hours, sharing knowledge and techniques in real time as they fought to save the life of a warrior who had been their enemy just days before. The procedure succeeded beyond everyone's expectations. Not only did Commander Zaktor survive, but his recovery rate exceeded even the enhanced healing they had achieved with other patients. The combination of advanced surgery, traditional healing, and synthetic crystal enhancement had created a new standard for what was possible in emergency medicine. As Commander Zaktor regained consciousness, his first words were directed at Sarah. "You are the human healer who gives life back to crystals," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Why do you preserve the life of your enemy?" Sarah met his golden gaze steadily. "Because you're not my enemy. You're my patient, and every patient deserves the best care we can provide, regardless of politics or species." The commander's crystal formations pulsed with what Sarah had learned to recognize as deep emotion among Zephyrians. "Your people have a saying, do they not? Do no harm, but you do more than avoid harm. You heal divisions that extend far beyond the body." As word of Commander Zaktor's successful treatment spread throughout the galaxy, Sarah realized that her simple decision to help 3 dying prisoners had evolved into something that could potentially change the course of the war itself. Medical stations throughout the combat zones began requesting information about the collaborative treatment protocols. Wounded soldiers from both sides started specifically asking to be treated at facilities that offered the new hybrid approaches. Most importantly, high-ranking officials from both governments began to recognize that their medical personnel could achieve remarkable results when they worked together instead of in opposition. Sarah had inadvertently demonstrated that cooperation between enemies was not only possible, but could produce outcomes that benefited everyone involved. The question now was whether the politicians and military leaders would be wise enough to build upon the foundation that medical collaboration had created. 6 months after the initial incident with the 3 dying prisoners, Nexus Station had been transformed into something unprecedented in galactic history. What had begun as a simple medical facility now served as the first official joint medical research center established between the Galactic Federation and the Zephyrian Empire. Sarah stood in the observation deck, overlooking the main medical bay, watching as teams of doctors, nurses, and healers from both sides worked together on their latest research project. They were developing new treatment protocols for a rare genetic condition that affected multiple species, building on the hybrid crystal enhancement techniques that had grown from her improvised treatments. The political transformation had been gradual, but undeniable. Commander Zaktor, whose life Sarah had saved, had returned to Zephyrian territory and become an unexpected advocate for continued medical cooperation. His personal testimony about the quality of care he had received from former enemies had influenced high-ranking officials throughout the Empire. Similarly, Federation soldiers who had witnessed or received the new collaborative treatments had reported their experiences up the chain of command. The dramatic improvement in survival rates and healing times was impossible for military leaders to ignore, even when it meant acknowledging that cooperation with the enemy produced better results than traditional approaches. "Nurse Chen," a familiar musical voice said behind her. Sarah turned to see Ambassador Kithara approaching, his crystal formations pulsing with the warm patterns she had learned to associate with contentment. Over the months, he had become not just a diplomatic representative, but a genuine collaborator in the medical research efforts. "Ambassador," she replied with a smile. "How did the council meeting go?" His crystal formations shifted to patterns that indicated cautious optimism. "Better than expected. The Zephyrian High Council has voted to establish 3 additional joint medical facilities. The Federation Council is expected to approve matching funding within the week." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. What had started with her unauthorized treatment of 3 prisoners was evolving into a network of cooperative medical centers that could serve the entire galaxy, but she also knew that the larger implications extended far beyond medicine. "And the peace negotiations?" she asked. Ambassador Kithara's expression grew more serious. "Preliminary discussions have begun. Both sides are calling them medical cooperation framework meetings. But everyone understands that we are exploring the possibility of a more comprehensive ceasefire." Sarah nodded. She had been hoping for this development for months. The success of medical collaboration had demonstrated that cooperation between the two powers was not only possible, but actively beneficial for both sides. Politicians and military leaders were beginning to question whether the war itself might be more destructive than productive. Dr. Kelmar joined them on the observation deck, carrying a tablet displaying the latest treatment statistics. His attitude toward both Sarah and the collaborative approach had undergone a complete transformation over the past months. "The numbers continue to improve," he reported. "Mortality rates for all species are down 43% compared to pre-collaboration baselines. Patient satisfaction scores are at historic highs, and we've successfully treated 17 conditions that were previously considered incurable." "What about the new training programs?" Sarah asked. "Remarkable success," Dr. Kelmar replied with obvious pride. "Medical personnel from over 30 species have completed the collaborative treatment certification. We have waiting lists for the next training sessions that extend 6 months out. The techniques you developed are spreading throughout the galaxy faster than we can train instructors." Sarah felt a sense of wonder at how far things had come. Her simple decision to treat 3 dying prisoners had grown into a galactic movement that was changing how different species approached medicine, cooperation, and even conflict resolution. The most satisfying part was seeing individual success stories. The young Zephyrian soldier she had saved that first night had fully recovered, and now worked as a liaison between traditional healers and Federation medical teams. Commander Zaktor had become a powerful voice for peace within the Empire's military leadership. Even Dr. Kelmar had co-authored several papers with Zephyrian healing specialists that were revolutionizing xenobiological medicine. But perhaps the most significant change was in Sarah herself. She had been promoted to Chief of Collaborative Medicine, a position that didn't exist before her unauthorized treatments created the need for it. More importantly, she had discovered that her human adaptability and intuitive problem-solving abilities were precisely what was needed to bridge the gaps between different species and different approaches to healing. "There's something else," Ambassador Kithara said, his crystal formations shifting to patterns Sarah didn't recognize. "The Zephyrian High Council has made a formal request to the Galactic Federation. They want to propose you for the Healer's Mark, our highest honor for medical service. Sarah blinked in surprise. I'm not Zephyrian. I'm not sure I'm eligible for your honors. That is precisely why the Council wishes to award it to you, the ambassador replied. You have demonstrated that healing transcends species boundaries. The Healer's Mark recognizes not just medical skill, but the wisdom to see beyond surface differences to the universal need for compassion and care. Dr. Kelmar added, the Federation Medical Council is proposing you for the Order of Galactic Merit as well. If both honors are approved, you would be the first individual ever to receive the highest medical recognition from both powers simultaneously. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the recognition, but also humbled by the responsibility it represented. Her actions had helped start something much larger than herself, and that movement now depended on continued cooperation and goodwill between former enemies. I accept the nominations, she said, but only if the ceremonies can be held here, at this station, with representatives from both sides present. These honors belong not just to me, but to everyone who chose cooperation over conflict. As if summoned by their conversation, the young Zephyrian soldier Sarah had first saved appeared in the observation deck doorway. His crystal formations were glowing with health and vitality, a remarkable transformation from the dying prisoner she had found months ago. Healer Sarah, he said, using the title that had become common among both species' medical personnel. The new patients from the Centauri conflict have arrived. Both sides are requesting the collaborative treatment protocols. Sarah smiled and followed him toward the medical bay. As they walked, she reflected on how a simple decision to help 3 dying prisoners had evolved into a movement that was changing the galaxy. The war between the Federation and the Empire was far from over, but the foundation for peace had been established in the most unlikely place imaginable. In medical bays throughout the galaxy, former enemies were working together to preserve life rather than destroy it. Soldiers from both sides were receiving better care than they had ever experienced, and medical knowledge was advancing at unprecedented rates. Most importantly, people from different species were learning to see past their differences and focus on their shared humanity, whether they were human, Zephyrian, Andromedan, or any of the dozens of other species involved in the collaboration. They all shared the fundamental desire to live, to heal, and to help others do the same. As Sarah entered the medical bay to begin treating the newest group of casualties, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of compassion. A nurse's decision to help 3 dying prisoners had grown into a galactic movement for peace, proving that individual choices could indeed change the course of history. The galaxy was still a dangerous place, filled with conflict and division, but now it also contained proof that cooperation was possible, that enemies could become allies, and that the simple act of caring for others could transcend any boundary that politics or prejudice might create. And that, Sarah thought as she approached her first patient of the day, was perhaps humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy, not advanced technology or military might, but the stubborn refusal to give up on the possibility that things could be better, and the determination to make that possibility a reality, one patient at a time.